be with all of you. Oh, hi, everyone. I'm Matt Jansen. I'm one of the AJOG Editorial Fellows. I'm so excited to be with you all this morning, if you're on the East Coast or whenever else you may be watching this in other time zones.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Kate Newhoff, and sorry, Matt and I are laughing because we thought we were live at 8 o'clock and we weren't. So we're talking to ourselves for the last 8 minutes. So, but we are live now. We're excited to be here this morning, and so we're just going to kind of start our conversation over again. But yeah, we're excited to go through the peer review process with you guys this morning.
Yeah. And so, really that's going to be the focus of this, kind of conversation and dialogue back and forth between Kate and I is how to, go about performing a peer review and going through some of the logistics and everything for it. And so we're really excited to bring this to you. And so, first of all, before we get into those things, we really just want to, have some acknowledgments to all of those mentors that have really helped us learn the peer review kind of process over the past year or so and helped, us kind of fine tune these presentations and everything as well. And so specifically that would be, all of the, editors at AJOG MFM, Drs. Bergella, Miller, and Mnuck, as well as the AJOG MFM team as well. Dr. Damasio, who's helping us with the StreamYard, right now, as well as Stacy Bolzenius, one of the editorial associates with AJOG MFM.
Yeah, and we definitely want to give a shout out to our co-AJOG MFM fellow, Jen. She's out on maternity leave right now. Jen, we miss you, but hope you're having some great, good quality time with that baby. And also, Jen helped us kind of prepare the content for today's session, so we definitely appreciate her for that.
Yeah, and so excuse me, this is really the second version or second episode of these video podcasts. We, have a first one that's available on YouTube now. And really the best way is to just search AJOG MFM, go to their channel on YouTube, and you can see our prior kind of introduction to the peer review process, really about why, peer review is so important. And you can also see other great content by some of the other editors there and other educational topics kind of relating to, maternal fetal medicine and OBGYN and the publishing process.
Yeah, absolutely. But now we're really excited moving forward to use this platform called StreamYard, which we're obviously still getting used to given our slightly late start this morning. But it's a really awesome platform. So basically, I didn't know anything about it before we started using it for this, but it allows you to stream live across multiple social media platforms at the same time. So people can log in from basically whatever their social media preference is. So Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. So that's really exciting. And we're going to be using that moving forward.
Yeah, and so specifically, kind of our objectives for today's discussion is to talk about, the nitty-gritty of how to perform a peer review. What the logistics of accepting and, declining a review is, as well as the methods that, Kate and I both use in terms of, kind of approaching a peer review to hopefully give you all some guidance just, for how we've come up with our process.
Yeah, and I when we talk about the methods, we'll also share some templates. I think Matt kind of has his own template that he uses, and I do too. But there's some also great resources out there regarding if you need a little bit more of like a structured approach to how to do a review. And then after that, we'll talk about how to actually write the comments to the editors and the authors, which is really sort of like the nuts and bolts of how you submit the review. So what they kind of want and expect that to look like. And then, yeah, go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
Yeah, and I was going to say at the end, we'll, kind of, do a question and answer. And if you're joining us live and you have access to type in comments in the StreamYard, certainly that's great. And we'll try to answer them live. Otherwise, I know many people watch this, at other times in their busy schedules. So, we'll monitor kind of the YouTube comments, which I think is the best way to kind of continue a dialogue moving forward and everything, and then try to respond to those and answer any questions on those as well. But, we're excited that this platform kind of enables us to do all those different things.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm going to turn it over to you, Kate, kind of as we get into, the next kind of component here and everything.
Yeah. So I kind of wanted to start off by saying that in order to write a good review, you really need to be a good reviewer in the professionalism sense. So, so when you agree to be a reviewer for a specific manuscript, they usually give you, I think for most journals, they give you about a 2-week turnaround time. And I know for me, as a fellow, like we have lots of things going on, and like sometimes it feels like the absolute like last thing that you need to be doing, and those 2 weeks can sneak up on you really fast. But it's really super important that you give the time that the manuscript deserves to really do a good review. So I don't know, how long do you usually spend, Matt? I usually kind of make sure I have like at least 3 hours to read and do a review.
Yeah, I think that that's, about how long it takes me as well. I'm sure some of the more senior reviewers will think that's crazy. They obviously are much, faster or adept at it. But I think especially when you're starting out, it takes me that long to kind of really do a thorough job.
Yeah, I mean, and the way I kind of think about it is that, this research has often taken like years to do, and the manuscript takes a long time to write. And so,
Mhm.
the authors are like eagerly awaiting the response of this journal, and then the journal is waiting on your review. And so there's kind of a lot riding on, your timeliness and thoroughness in completing these reviews. And I think, I mean, you can ask for an extension, right, Matt, if you really have to.
Yeah, if you can message the, kind of editorial associates and everything as well, and there's a way to do that in this system saying, hey, I'm excited about this review, but I have this other deadline that I just have to, get done. And then I'm would be happy to do this review. And I think just as we all know, that's the, best thing to do from a professionalism stance, as opposed to just being late with the review too. So I feel like it's always good to give them a heads up, and that way they can decide, if you're the last reviewer they're waiting for, maybe they'll move to someone else, or maybe they'll be okay kind of waiting for it.
Yeah, and usually, my impression is that a couple of days is okay. Now, if you're going to be like weeks late, it's probably good to kind of try to recognize that ahead of time and just decline the review. But the other important component of this is that the journals actually track this. So I did a screenshot of my AJOG MFM page. I removed all of my own statistics from it, but you can see there that it lists like when you last did a review, how many invitations that you've agreed to, how many you've declined, how many you submitted on time, how late you were, if you didn't submit them on time. And so it's important the journal uses this to basically track how reliable of a reviewer you are. So, if they see that you've submitted every single review late, they might not ask you to review again. But kind of on a more positive note, I think this page is very helpful, as a new reviewer, for me to basically track my own stats, because it also gives you a link to all of the reviews that you've done. Yeah. So I mean, I think that's kind of helpful, because if I'm ever like, oh, what did I say for that last paper, or whatever happened with that last paper, I can click the link and see.
And not, only just your reviews. I mean, you can go back, and click on the other reviewers that are assigned to papers you've looked at before. And so, every journal may do it a little bit differently, but for AJOG MFM, they typically assign three reviewers. And so, I can go back and see, okay, like, well, what did they think of the same paper that I reviewed? Did they have a different interpretation? Did they recommend, a different outcome for the paper? And also see, well, how did they present kind of their critique or constructive feedback to the authors, and what can I learn and take away from that? And I've certainly found that, very helpful. And Kate, I know that's something that you and I have spoken about, I think together before, that that's also a really great, feature for us.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Like, honestly, I think that's one of my favorite parts of the review process, is looking at what other reviewers have said about the same paper, just for my own learning. And then also, I think it's really cool that everybody kind of approaches a review from a little bit of a different lens. And we'll talk about that more later when we talk about the comments to the editors and stuff like that. But yeah, super helpful page where you can kind of look at all the previous reviews that you've done, and then also the other reviews on that particular manuscript. I did want to say one other thing, Matt, before we kind of move forward, is that I also think it's really important to review things that interest you. And Dr. Brigel actually helped me with this a lot when we first started this fellowship, and he was going to assign a paper for me to review. And he was like, oh, there's this great paper on diabetes. And I was like, oh, okay. And he's like, are you interested in diabetes? I was like, not really. And he's like, okay, you don't have to review papers on topics that you're not interested in. And that was like so refreshing to me, because, this is ultimately optional, to be a reviewer. And so, review something that interests you. And I really think, it can be fun, and it can be like a little mini educational exercise, because you get to see new research in a topic that interests you. And also, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but you can, when you're doing your lit review and that sort of thing, it's just a really good opportunity to kind of expand your knowledge base while you're doing the review. So pick a topic that interests you. Again, like we just mentioned, you don't want to decline every paper that they ask you to review, but you can kind of pick different topics.
Yeah, and the way that you kind of, pick different topics, because I like totally agree with that, is that when you first kind of log in or you sign in, it'll ask you for your areas of expertise. And that's really how the editors can go through and say, okay, like this paper is on genetics, like who's listed that they're, more interested or more experts in genetics, and, or diabetes, or whatever the exact topic may be. And that's how they, find people that they want to review. Now, certainly sometimes they know that they have a certain person in mind they want to review, they know is an expert in the field. And I think the other thing, just to the more, junior people like ourselves, is, I always feel a little bit, shy about putting expert in different areas, but it's really just that those are kind of your interest areas and what you want to, focus on and everything, and do the literature search on and stuff as well. So, just take your time and make sure you kind of select those accordingly, because that'll determine the reviews that you get asked to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. So then kind of moving on, I wanted to go through, okay, like what is actually some of our process and everything as well. And so, I'm going to start just kind of reviewing my process, and Kate will, kind of go through hers as well. And other people may have other ones, and we'd be happy to hear about those in the comments, everything too, just as a medium to share those, different techniques. But, certainly when you log into the website, the journal does provide like a template saying, enter your major comments here, enter your minor comments here, but I typically am, doing this, sometimes without the internet or without being on the website. And so I like to have my own template, which, I kind of developed, from doing these, as well as through, one of the, prior AJOG Editorial Fellows, Dr. Kern Goldberger, who kind of helped me get started as well. And, the first thing that I really do is I just read through the paper once, kind of with my template on the side, like I have here on the right, but I don't take any notes on it first. I just try to get the general gist of the paper and kind of the, outcomes of the paper. And Kate, is that what you do too? Or
I mean, that's exactly what I do. The first time I read the paper, I try to make it really relaxed. Sometimes I like make myself a cup of tea, because I like to pretend to be British sometimes. And so, I just sit back, get in a comfy chair, and I just read the paper. And just like what you said, Matt, I'm usually kind of trying to just get an overall impression of like, is this interesting? Would I go to work the next day and be like, hey, did you read that new article in AJOG MFM? And, was it overall easy to follow? Would it change my clinical practice? Like those kind of more global questions, very similarly to if I just picked up a journal and read an article out of it.
Yeah. And I also think, kind of once I've read through it once, that's typically when I go and I, kind of click through the literature search as well. And actually the AJOG website is great for that, because there's a button you can click that says like find other papers similar to this. And certainly you can do your own search too, but I like using that feature. And that then helps me to kind of, I know what this paper's about. I can then look through some of the other literature and PubMed, kind of contextualize it within kind of the data and the science that's already out there, before I then go through and start writing down the comments and everything as well.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think this kind of where it ties back into do something that interests you, because then it becomes more interesting and less of a chore. And I think we're all like a little nerdy at this point, especially if you're agreeing to review a journal article. But like, I really could kind of get into this part, because you're like, oh, like what does the rest of the literature say? Like, is this new? Is this help? And they should be addressing that in the discussions, obviously. But like this gives you kind of a framework to go into reading it through the second time, which I think, Matt, you're going to talk about, where we're, you're a little bit more detailed and critical.
Yeah, and that's really where I start, kind of writing and typing out my comments and everything as well. And when I'm going through it again, I may do it right away. I may do it the next day or something as well. I don't think it has to be all necessarily at once. But then I go through and I say, okay, I'm looking for the major comments. And I think it took me a little while to really understand, well, what is a major versus a minor comment? And after having, gotten some more experience doing it, I think, realizing that the major comments are things that can't be necessarily, fixed, with the, paper, the study design. And so you're really first looking for, major methodological errors or limitations, that they're looking at, are they using the correct population? Are they, answering or are they asking an appropriate question? And does the study design match that question that they're asking? As well as, do they interpret, kind of their results, correctly? I think this is also the time to say, in the major comment, not only, that you think something is a flaw or something is bad, but saying, okay, why did you make these decisions? Maybe expand on that, so that the reader can, understand, why they made a certain study design decision. Or, have you thought about including another variable, or why did you restrict it to these different analyses? And so those are also, I think, appropriate, major comments, if those are the things that are coming up for you when you're going back through.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the second time I read it, after I've kind of done my nice relaxed read, the second time, I agree. Now, I hate to kill trees, but I usually do print it out, and then that's when I kind of go through and I circle and I write question marks in the margins, and and I'm asking, like, well, what about this? And so then I'm expecting those questions to be addressed, like in the discussion and that sort of thing. But one thing I do want to say is this was, like, shout out to all of my imposter syndrome friends out there. But like, I think it's hard as a junior reviewer sometimes to think that a paper could have significant errors in it. But they can. So when you're reading, like, you should be asking yourself, is this actually a cohort study like they say that it is? Did they actually do an appropriate randomized controlled trial? Like, and the other thing too is this is where I also go back and read the abstract and ask myself, like, does their abstract reflect the conclusions of the paper? And don't be afraid to recognize that sometimes they don't. Like, I've seen papers incorrectly identify the study design and that sort of thing. So it happens, and that's part of your job as a reviewer, to catch those things. And that's really where that kind of detailed, kind of skeptical review comes in.
Yeah, and I think that kind of leads to the, how I think about the minor comments as well, which is, certainly, like you said, I think like a minor comment can be, the abstract needs to line up more and be more consistent, right? That's something that, you change a few sentences, and you can fix, right? You can't obviously change the total study design, and that's why that is more of the methodological concern. But also with the minor comments, I think the first few, reviews I did, I'm sure that everyone was sick of it, because I was putting in every grammatical thing and every comma or semicolon, and I'm not even very good at those, so maybe I was wrong. But you don't have to do that. The editorial associates and everyone will go through that and are professional trained in how to do that much more than I am as well. And so really your goal is to say, okay, are we getting close from a scientific standpoint for, publication, or do we just need to clarify some things, or do we have major revisions that we need?
Sure.
The other thing that I'll say is, sometimes, you can request a specific review if you feel like the, English language needs more help or anything. And that is a service that, the AJOG MFM, provides to, authors and everything as well, because, as long as the science and the data is good, maybe those things can be improved on and then still have a really, really good paper. And, so that's not a reason to necessarily reject a paper. And I think, it's always good to have a little bit of empathy for that. I can't even necessarily speak another language, let alone write a scientific paper in one. So I'm always super impressed. And I think it's great that they have the tools to, help refine those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've never, yeah, I agree, Matt. Like, they don't want to know, like, oh, you misspelled this word on line 75. But I have definitely put in my comments, like, please review the grammar and punctuation of this paper. Like, it needs a little additional, corrections. So yeah, absolutely. And then I don't know about you, Matt, but I usually end up reading the paper probably at least 3 times. So like the third time I read it is where I kind of go back and see, did I get my questions answered? And that's where I personally start to kind of fill out my review. And I think you have your little summary on the side there. So that's is that what you use for all of your reviews? The one that's on the
Yeah,
side?
I just use it to make sure that I'm not missing anything, and that I'm kind of, have a system to go through, the different components of the paper and everything. And I think probably once you get more familiar and you're doing this more, you probably memorize this and you don't need it. But I just think that it helps me structure, my thinking and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like when you're first starting out doing reviews. And actually, I think on the next page, I share, if you're still looking, if you think what Matt and I just said was like still a little vague, if you want a really detailed kind of review, we'll put the link to this paper, but Dr. Miller was on this paper, and it's basically like a critical appraisal of the of a peer review. And so this chart's even longer than what's seen on the screen, but it really just walks you through it step by step. And I found that super helpful in my first couple of reviews that I did. This is also really helpful for anybody doing journal club. I mean, it's just how to read a paper and ask yourself those questions. So yeah, but I agree. I mean, as you do more, I think I have found that my reviews have gotten slightly shorter, and more succinct. But this was very helpful, as I was starting out.
Yeah. And so, we'll put the link, I think maybe in the YouTube, but to, some of these different references and everything. And certainly this paper that Kate was alluding to, but we have a few others as well that are, published, papers in specifically OBGYN about reviewing in this field and everything as well. And not that it can't be translated to other fields, but I do think that it's nice to have some specifically in our field, to look to for guidance and everything as well. And so, especially for the first, few times you review, I do think it's a good idea to maybe, even before you accept a review, to kind of look through some of these papers, get the idea, get some of this, kind of, more, methodologic background and everything.
Well, Matt, I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
So what do you do? So let's say I've agreed to review a paper, but I am not a statistician. So how do you kind of approach, if you read a paper and you just really don't understand what the stats are saying?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, I'm certainly not a statistician either. And I think that, you can always request a statistical review when you submit your comments. And that's one of the little check boxes that you can say. And you don't want to request a statistical review for every paper, and you want to be familiar with some statistics. And I actually think that by reading through papers and having to actually try to understand and analyze some statistics has, made me kind of learn more too and be better with those. But certainly, there are some papers that have very complicated genetic, sequencing statistics or other things like that I'm, not adept at. And if you are, that's phenomenal to be able to do those things. But otherwise, you can request, saying, I think that we need an expert statistician to help us, make sure that the statistics are sound, and the reviewers and the editors can look over those check boxes and decide whether they also think that's needed or not.
Yeah, I agree. And another thing too is that this kind of goes back to treating this as an educational opportunity. It has helped me understand statistics better. And I've also definitely phoned a friend. I know my fellow Dr. Munoz who just graduated was much better or is much better at statistics than me. And so I have definitely kind of run a few things by him, be like, well, is this the right test that they were supposed to run if I didn't think something made a lot of sense? The other thing too, that I try to remind myself, if maybe I feel like I'm not adequately addressing the statistics of a paper, is that there are 3 reviewers for each paper. And the nice thing about kind of going back and looking at other reviewers' comments is that everybody's going to approach the reviews slightly differently and is going to kind of focus on different things. So I think it's okay to not necessarily hone in on statistics if that's not necessarily your area of expertise. So there are other meaningful and important comments that you can bring to the paper.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we were just going to move on just a little bit and talk about how to, kind of finalize your comments to the authors versus comments to, the editors. And the only thing I'll say, is that I think it's important just to know that although, Kate's name comes up here and everything, that the authors don't see your name in most journals that I'm aware of, certainly not with AJOG MFM. And so you're blinded to who they are and they're blinded to who you are, obviously, to try to reduce bias. So, you still want to be professional, but, they're not going to, be emailing you saying, why did you say this about my paper or something?
Yeah, this is just a screenshot I took from a previous paper that I had reviewed. Of course, removed the paper identifying information, but this is kind of like the first part that you see when you're submitting a review. So the first thing you have to do is decide whether to accept, reject, or accept with revisions. And I know that was like kind of intimidating for me. I mean, still is intimidating for me to kind of make that final decision. I don't know, Matt, do you have like an approach that you use to decide whether or not you accept or reject a paper?
Yeah, I think of it, and I kind of go back to those major versus minor comments. And I think that if, if you think there's a major kind of study design flaw or, analysis flaw that can't be fixed, or that would totally change the results and the conclusions if it were to be fixed, then I think that's a different paper. And I think if it's a different paper, then I tend to kind of reject it. However, I think if you need to, kind of line things up more within the abstract, or, maybe line a few of the conclusions up more, but the methodology is sound, then, I tend to say, let's revise the paper, or, even if it's great, then just saying, right out, accept it. And the only other thing I think that comes into it is saying, okay, well, has this paper already been published 12 times before or not? And that's why that initial kind of literature review helps. But what's your technique? Do you have a different way?
No, I do it very similarly. And I think too, like, don't be afraid to reject a paper. I think you pretty much end up rejecting more than what you accept, or at least I do. And maybe I'm just a mean reviewer. I don't know. But most papers, unfortunately, that are reviewed do not end up getting published in some of the major journals. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that they're not going to get published somewhere else. But yeah, so I mean, it's okay. And then you can also, again, go back and see what your other reviewers have said. But I do a very similar thing to you. The other thing I kind of wanted to point out here is, if you look this transfer authorization, so, that basically just asks, are you okay with your review getting published? Are you okay with being acknowledged that you perform reviews, and that sort of thing? And I just usually I've never had any reason to put no there. So, that's, I guess if you're being really cautious and you're a first time reviewer, maybe you can put no while you're like learning the process if you want, but that's there. And then they kind of go through these rating questions. And I find that these are very easy to answer if you've spent the time, like you've put the time in ahead of time and have done that, that multi-read review that Matt and I just talked about. So, I mean, it's pretty easy to go through and just be like, oh, was this original? Does this have merit? How's the abstract? And just kind of go down the line.
And I think the only other thing I'll add that you kind of alluded to is at the beginning as well, is that even if you start reading the paper and you read it the first time, and that this paper is going to be rejected and that you're going to reject this paper, I still think it's important to put in, the remainder of the time and do those extra steps, because, as you said, Kate, maybe this paper will be published somewhere else, and you still are trying to help those, authors, improve the publication for either, maybe you'll resubmit it to this journal, maybe it'll be a different journal, but you're still providing that constructive sort of criticism and feedback that's going to help them, with this, manuscript, or with others that they may submit and everything too. So, when you say you're going to review a paper, obviously you don't know whether it's going to be good or bad, and just saying, okay, I know that this is what I've signed up for, and this is the amount of time it's going to take, and that's what I'm going to, make sure I do, regardless of the overall quality of it.
I totally agree, Matt. And that's actually an awesome segue into kind of the next section. So, like, after this page, there's two boxes, and the first box says comments to the editor, and then the second box says comments to the author. And so the comments to the author, I'll talk about first, since you just brought it up. But this is where it goes back. You want to be professional, and you want to give the authors the respect, even if you think that the paper was terrible, even if you want to reject the paper, give the authors the respect and the due diligence for the time and effort that they put into writing the paper. And even if you reject it, your comments can still be helpful if they're going to try to submit it to another journal. And so, I don't know about you, Matt, but the way that I format the comments, and Dr. Bergella mentioned that he likes to see this too as an editor, is that when I'm writing the comments to the author, I try to do it in numbers and bullet points, of things that the authors need to address before it gets published. And that's before it gets published at your journal or another journal, but like, these are the things that need to be addressed, instead of like, this paper was terrible, like throw it away. It's like a very systematic, kind of bullet point thing that's easy to read and easy to address, kind of one step at a time. I don't know how.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think so. I think I try to, write them as, in a way in which if I receive those comments, okay, would I know what to do with my paper? Would I know how to fix my paper? And that's kind of the, obviously kind of like the golden rule, I guess, of reviewing, try to do it as you would want your reviews to come to you, obviously.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great way to put it. Yeah. The other thing, so that kind of goes back to, well, then if those are the comments to the author, what do you put in the comments to the editor? And so, and I've asked this a couple of times of different editors of journals, and the general consensus is that, like, you want to put comments to the editor. I usually try to put an overall, just like general statement about my impression of the paper. And I usually am pretty blunt. I mean, again, you want to be professional, but I'm usually pretty blunt. And I'm like, I really don't think that this paper is novel enough for the Pink Journal, period. It's also a place where you can put comments if you are really concerned about, significant bias that wasn't addressed, or any kind of major things that you think you need to point out to the editors that really aren't appropriate or necessary for the authors to see. So it's your opportunity to have a confidential, communication with the editor. I don't know what.
Yeah, and I just make it much more succinct, like you said, than kind of the rest of my comments. Just so obviously they're going to look at your comments and everything too, but just that way they can say, okay, I can see what they said succinctly. It matches up with the other reviewers. I'll take a deeper dive, in these areas, but they get a better kind of just overview.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's about it. So like, then you just hit submit, and then you'll find out later. Usually sometimes you have to check back on your little, reviewer page. But you can find out if the paper ended up getting accepted or rejected, whether it, aligns with what you said. And then you can also, I highly recommend, I cannot recommend enough, as a junior reviewer, to really go back and look at what your other reviewers have said of that same paper. It's been super helpful for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, that kind of almost brings us to kind of wrapping up here and everything.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
and walking through the whole process.
Yeah, I think the only other thing that I would say is that, if you're still nervous, even after listening to this and doing all your reviews, if you're still nervous about hitting that like submit button on your review, it's always great to ask for help from a more senior faculty member or something. And it's always appropriate to say, hey, like, can I have some help? And the editors of most of these journals are usually very receptive to that too. I know that, there's several journals that have like kind of a junior reviewer category. And so in my first couple of reviews, I put in the comments to the editor, I'm a junior reviewer, would appreciate any feedback. And sometimes you'll get an email back from an editor will be like, great review. I would work on these things. So, yeah, it's been super helpful. I love the review process, and yeah, totally. I've found it to be extremely educational in my kind of training as a fellow, but it's definitely something I'm going to continue doing even as I become a faculty. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, this process is really fun too, as hopefully you've gotten, and is really educational for yourself. And I think, as I'm starting to write abstract more and things and get, papers together this time of year, I find that, I think that they're better because of going through this review process. Absolutely. And so, I don't see any specific comments or questions in the chat now, but again, we'll kind of monitor some of the other platforms and everything, but feel free to kind of reach out to us as well with any other questions or concerns. And then, we also hope to, have a few more of these keep going, in which we're going to, interview other people with more expertise, certainly than we have, to give us their insights, also from the editor level of everything as well. And so stay tuned for those, and we'll certainly post about when those will be upcoming. And we also are excited that, we'll have Jen back and everything later down the road too.
Yeah, and I think there's a new group of AJOG MFM fellows coming in too. So yeah, it'll be fun. Well, Matt, it was great talking to you as always. We still have to meet in person, but it will happen one day. So, but
This year.
talking to you. Have a great Friday, and I thanks everybody for tuning in.
Yep, thank you all. Bye.
I don't know how to end it.